academic activism. Let's get into the ugly stuff. I am a 70s product. Any 70s products, meaning you were born in the 70s. For all of you who are not born in the 70s. So our education in the 70s, particularly as it relates to equity, inclusion, and diversity, usually revolved around two things. And please correct me if I'm wrong. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. If you were lucky, you actually got into the civil rights movement just a little bit to know what started it, right? Fast forward to now, I go to my son's parent-teacher conference, and she is bragging about their diversity education curriculum, and she displays in her PowerPoint how they're talking about Christopher Columbus discovering America. My thoughts exactly. So I am immediately being shunned away by my wife because I'm literally about to go ballistic during the parent-teacher conference in PowerPoint. So she ushers me out, and I'm thinking, how disingenuous is that, right? That we are still today feeding kids misinformation, or at least information that is so slanted and slighted that it's not giving the full story. So I open with that to ask this next question. When, as panel members, as parents, as activists, as community members, as educators, as students, when you hear the term equity in education, what does that mean to you? And how do you know when you're seeing it, when you're involved in it, when you're pushing it, when you're advocating for it? Or on the other side, how do you know when you're not seeing it? When it feels that oppressive or so restricted and rigid that you know something wrong is happening here. Bam!
To me, equity in education really means about elevating all voices and all viewpoints. So, you know, I used to do a lot of professional development for teachers in Minneapolis, and one of the things that I would always say that I think is really important is that teachers need to understand that all their students come to school with a set of experiences and a worldview that is just as valid as yours. It's different than yours, but it's just as valid as yours. So you need to honor where your students are coming from and teach through the lens through which they see the world. That's equity in education. Because I used to sometimes sound a little radical and say, there's a difference between education and learning. And education is sometimes can be thought of as indoctrination into a very narrowly focused worldview and acceptable behavior. And that's what equity does not look like. Equity looks like a classroom might look kind of messy because there's all kinds of exciting learning going on, and kids who have different learning styles are doing different things. Equity does not look like straight rows and everyone is listening to the teacher impart wisdom. I think that, it's one of those things like you know it when you see it, but I think that to me it's really about acknowledging that your perspective is not the only perspective.
Wow, I could absolutely not agree more. So I'll first say that my experience with Edina Schools was overwhelmingly positive. It was like a ray of sunshine. And then we were gonna move to Savannah, Georgia. So we went down, toured some schools. If you guys don't know, it's like this antebellum city. It kind of looks like a historical Disney World or land. It's really beautiful. And when we were down there, we were kind of soaking in the beach and getting the sun's rays and just kind of enjoying the historic tours. And so then we started touring the schools. And we didn't know if we were going to pick public or private. Clearly we picked neither because we're here. So foreshadowing. So we went to the public schools first. I tend to be frugal. My husband's frugaler, more frugal. So we toured the public schools. And we knew Heron was non-binary at the time. And we approached the school and said, like, this is what it looks like. This is who our child is right now. Like, kind of the same question that I gave to Katie Mahoney in Edina schools. And so Katie treated us with open arms instead of kind of going shoulder to shoulder, partnering to help Heron feel included. When I had those same comments or those same thoughts presented to the public schools down in Savannah, my experience was not the same. It was, have you had your child tested? How do you know? Why do you think that this is still going to be the case in X number of months? I felt defensive, I felt small, I felt very little, and I immediately turned away from that public option. Then, private, it's expensive, but I would have done it for my kids. The private schools have gender-specific uniforms that cannot be changed. It's based on your birth certificate. They asked me to change my child's birth certificate. And I said, I feel like what you're asking of me is more than what you would ask of another parent coming in. This is too much, especially considering the investment that I'm going to make in terms of dollars to your school. So we were going to homeschool. Clearly that would have had a very STEM-focused education, and this all vocabulary is not a part of our life. And I knew that my pitfalls as a parent would be apparent in my child when they're raised without any lib arts. So we decided to stay in Minnesota, where Katie and her entire school opened their arms to us, stood shoulder to shoulder with us, and made us feel incredibly welcome. I had no idea that people in education in Georgia could have made me feel so small. And I feel like that is what equity looks like. Is I felt like I was a partner in my child's education up here, and I felt like in Savannah, I was a problem.
Alright. So, for me, the household I grew up in was very open with who we were and what we believed in. And going to school, and especially in like history class, they would show us things that weren't true. They would really veil the truth in those aspects, especially my grandmother is an immigrant from Korea, and I remember learning about the Korean War, and they really dove down the horrible things that happened. And I didn't want that. I wanted the full truth. I wanted to know what had happened, why these things had happened, and I wasn't being given that. For me, I really was happy when I was able to come into the district and I was able to go to high school and see that they had options where you were able to learn about specific things. They didn't really make excuses for things that had happened. They taught the things as they'd happened. So they taught about the Trail of Tears. They taught that Christopher Columbus was a whack job. They really didn't cover that up, and that was really refreshing. It was nice for me to see because I didn't want to be told things from the perspective of how society wants you to see it, but how it actually happened. And I think really equity in the school system especially is teaching things how it happened and giving people the option to know.
I feel like, okay, I might be the voice of dissent, but maybe not in this room, which actually probably not in this room. So if equity means equalizing opportunity, inviting all voices, making space for voices, telling the truth, right-sizing everyone's experience, right? So that the small are made big and the big are made small and all of that, right, in good ways, then I think it is not possible to achieve equity in the United States, certainly in higher ed, unless we take money out of it from the payer's point of view, right? So you shouldn't have to pay for a college education if you want it to be equitable.
You should run for office.
If I were interested in making money, I might, but it's not a priority. So when I think and equity on college campuses, it's a big deal, right? Because there are so many people who are suffering and paying for it, right? And what students understand, I think, in terms of our capitalist system, oftentimes is they directly confront it in the classroom, and then it is immediately it's made invisible on campuses in some very overt ways that fly in the face of what it means to have equity, right? I have ideas about what equity means in K-12 as well, but as a citizen, not as a parent or an educator. But I think equity would look like everyone showing up to achieve a shared goal, right? That's ultimately what it would look like. Colleges do not look like that in the United States. In a lot of parts of the world, colleges do not look like that. So I would have to say equity to me looks like, and maybe we're on the edge, it looks like the end of capitalism, honestly. Let's get profit out of the whole system, and then we can start talking about why it is that things like structural racism exist on college campuses, as that is the #1 place you can go in the Twin Cities to experience structural racism is a college campus, and you get to pay for the experience while you're there, right? I mean, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you yourself are going to experience the negative effects, but you're going to see it, right? Everybody sees it. These things are also true, certainly in terms of gender diversity, ableism, you name it, right? Xenophobia, you name it. All of those things we can see on college campuses. So as long as we can see those things there, I have a hard time thinking about equity and the money that it costs, especially at the institutions that I went to get a degree, like the University of Minnesota. It's a very expensive place, and the institution that I now teach at is even more expensive than that, and it breaks my heart to think about how much money kids are spending to actually have a bad time. So that's what equity means to me.